Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. My name is Diana Skaya. Ukraine is opening pressure on multiple fronts, from accusing Israel of receiving grain stolen from occupied territories to launching another deep strike on Russia's Tuapse oil refinery, while a major prisoner release in Belarus may signal shifting regional diplomacy. Is Kyiv escalating strategically, both military and diplomatically? Well, joining me now to find out is Chris York, news editor at the Kyiv Independent. Chris, welcome to TVP World. Glad to have you here with us. So how serious, Chris, is this dispute over the alleged stolen Ukrainian grain? I mean, is it a commercial spat? Are we seeing a real diplomatic crisis possibly erupt between Kyiv and Israel?
I think potentially, and it could spread even wider than that. The initial investigation that uncovered this by Haaretz seemed to uncover pretty solid evidence of at least two cargo ships filled with grain that Russia has stolen from the occupied Ukrainian territories, docking in Israel. And then within their investigation, they suggest that the actual real number could be as high as 30. And because Israel does not recognize occupied Ukraine as Russian, that, it's internationally, that counts as effectively stolen goods. Israel has said that Ukraine hasn't provided enough evidence for it, but it's hard to see how it couldn't, given this investigation. And one of the things that Ukraine has said to Israel is, they have modern ports and docks. They have means of tracking where all of these shipments of all the things that come into Israel come from. So there doesn't seem to be any reason why Israel couldn't determine the source of this grain.
There's something that the Israeli foreign minister said regarding this. Gideon Sa'ar, let's take a listen.
Clearly, we reject this kind of Twitter diplomacy. And now to the facts. The Director General of our ministry, spoke earlier today with the Israel Tax Authority, which has begun an examination of the matter. When you examine something, you check the facts. The vessel has not entered the port and has yet to submit its documents. It's not possible to verify the truth of the Ukrainian claims regarding the forgery of the bill of lading. Up until this point, the Ukrainian government has not submitted a request for legal assistance. They submitted tweets.
All right, Chris, there we heard it, Gideon Sa'ar saying what he said, and we also know that Ukraine has summoned Israel's ambassador, Michael Brodsky, in this public escalation. What do you make out of what the Israeli minister said, the Israeli foreign minister said?
Well, it's impossible to know what has been happening in back channels between Israel and Ukraine, so we don't know for certain what evidence has been submitted, what requests have been made. I think it's a bit unfair to describe things as Twitter diplomacy, because from what Ukraine is saying, they've tried to submit what they know and to warn the Israelis that this was happening. And it appears, at least on the face of it, that Zelensky going on Twitter was sort of a last-ditch attempt to raise the issue in the sphere of social media, so almost like a last resort. But one of the latest developments is the EU have gotten involved, and they've said that they might prepare sanctions against the ships and companies and all of those involved in it. So it's not just Ukraine that's sort of standing alone making these accusations. The EU seems to be taking them seriously as well.
What about Zelensky now, of course, also threatening sanctions tied to this trade, of course, with Israel? And let's be reminded here that, Ukraine has, of course, had its own share of corruption, of corruption schemes. With some of those who were involved or responsible have actually fled to Israel. Do you think that this is actually going to deteriorate ties between Ukraine and Israel?
I think it's too early to tell. I think we're at the beginnings of a bit of a rumbling of a potential diplomatic spat. But Israel and Ukraine have always sort of had very delicate relationship. Israel has always condemned Russian aggression, but has never provided Ukraine with military aid. But we have, there's deep links between the country. There's a lot of Ukrainian immigrants in Israel. But as far as how this is unfolding, I wouldn't like to make any predictions about what could happen, I'm afraid.
Let me shift gears here for a moment. Ukraine now has hit Tuapse, right, 3 times in less than 2 weeks. Chris, what makes this refinery such a strategic target?
Just the amount of oil that it refines. It's one of the biggest in Russia. It's an integral part of Russia's money-making machine. Obviously, even with all of the sanctions that are in place against Russia's oil, they still manage to export a significant amount of it with using its shadow fleet. And this particular blast has been pretty devastating on this oil refinery. The drones that they use in these strikes don't have particularly large warheads when you compare them to missiles and heavier long-range weapons. But I don't know if it was the number of drones that hit or if they hit just a lucky part of the oil refinery. But as you can see from the videos that are playing there, it's had an absolutely devastating effect. I think it was nearly 2 weeks ago that this fire started, and Ukraine has hit it now 3 times, most recently last night. And yeah, it's had a devastating effect on the oil refinery, but also on the city of Tuapse itself. And I think one of the more interesting things that has come out of this is a lot of Russians on social media obviously don't like that Ukraine is bringing the war home to Russian territory. And a lot of the criticism on social media from Russians in the city has been directed directly at Putin himself. And we all know how Putin reacts to criticism. He doesn't like it at all. He'll do everything he can to stamp it out. But it's pretty difficult to ignore the criticism that people are raising that, Russia is supposed to protect its people from the effects of this war, which is, over the border and in another country.
Are Russians,
here we are.
Chris, are Russians waking up into, Putin has, throughout his, propaganda channels, over the past many years, even before, of course, the war and the invasion of Ukraine, right? He's always been, talking about, their imperialistic dreams and so on. But now, exactly with what you said, do you think that this time around, the Russians are actually beginning to wake up and maybe realizing, hey, Ukraine is actually beginning to meaningfully disrupt Russia's military logistics?
I think that's a fair thing to say. It's very, very difficult to hide a fire of that size in the middle of a large city in Russia. And there's always been a sort of unspoken social contract between Putin and the Russian people that they will wage this war in Ukraine, but the Russian people themselves will be protected. That's why they can't do a full-scale mobilization, because they have to pay these contract soldiers, and it keeps this level of distance between the Russian people and the war. But when Ukraine brings it home to Russia in a way such as this, that really breaks that social contract, and that potentially will cause Putin some serious problems.
What about mobilization efforts? We also know that Vladimir Putin has, of course, keeps shutting off the internet for Russians, making it more difficult. Can you tell us a few words about that?
Sure. it all seems like I don't want to get ahead of myself and sound too optimistic, but there is the feeling in Ukraine, especially after the really, really difficult winter we had, is beginning to be, maybe I can't say positive, but hopeful, I guess, that maybe the tide is beginning to turn in Ukraine's favor. The battlefield, the front lines haven't barely moved at all over winter. And yet Russia has continued to lose 30 to 35,000 soldiers a month. Ukraine is now taking out more Russian soldiers than Russia can recruit through this contract system, and that's just not a sustainable thing for Russia to do. And in terms of options, Putin can't stop the war because he hasn't achieved enough of his aims to declare victory. He would have to take at least the rest of the Donbass region to do that. And in terms of options, he's running out. He failed to bomb Ukraine into submission over the winter. He failed to convince the US to force Ukraine to hand over the Donbass. And he can't launch a mobilization because that would be incredibly damaging, if not fatal, for him politically. So Ukraine has managed to hold the line for long enough now that perhaps we're beginning to see a slight turning in the tide of the war.
You did mention something there, Chris. You did say that Vladimir Putin probably won't be able to say that the war is ended because he didn't achieve his goals. Let me ask you this though: what happens in the case in the scenario where he would actually say, "Hey, the war is ended"? What do Russians think then?
I mean, the Russian people will believe a lot of stuff that very clearly isn't true. I don't think many people would disagree with that. But I just don't see a scenario where Putin can turn around, if it was to be resolved this week. How can Putin argue that the number of soldiers lost, the number of tanks, the number of missiles spent, the damage to the economy, these fires we're burning in Trabzon now, how could he say that it was worth it, especially with their stated goals all along, the minimum of which has been taking of all the Donbass region?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris York, news editor at the Kyiv Independent, for being my guest here on World Talks today.
Thanks very much.
And thank you for watching this episode of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. I'll see you next time.